Let's return to This Week in America. Here's your host, Rick Bratton.
Welcome back, everybody, coast to coast, This Week in America. 126 Days in Philada, a story of the Constitutional Convention by Russell J. Rucker, is a dive into the secret meetings to experience the Constitutional Convention in an entertaining and yet informative way. You are taken to Philadelphia as the delegates gather for a captivating exploration of challenging issues and times. Russell is a historian specializing in the founding era, a seasoned historian with over 40 years of expertise in constitutional theory and America's founding. He's a devoted constitutionalist who has served in numerous organizations as well as in government. For him, it's been a serious study of the founders, their time, and the documents they created. Russell J. Rucker, author of 126 Days in Philada, a story of the Constitutional Convention, joins us on This Week in America. Russell, welcome to the program. It's great to have you with us today.
Well, thank you very much, Rick. I'm glad to be here.
I am looking forward to this. I love the background, the expertise, the entertainment value, the informative value you bring to this book. Looking forward to our conversation. In talking about the convention itself, why was there such a secrecy in the convention? I mentioned that in the beginning. Why, for instance, was Jefferson not involved? Sort of surprising, probably to most people, to read that.
Well, Jefferson was in Europe at the time, which is why he wasn't involved. He was a diplomat. I think he was assigned to France at the time, and he had been delayed getting over there because when he was first asked, he was serving as the governor of Virginia. So after he was through with that term, he went overseas. As far as and a lot of people don't understand that he wasn't there, but that's why he wasn't there. And he had no knowledge of what was going on because of the secrecy. The secrecy of the convention was determined during the rules when they first met on May 25th, and they started working towards a document. The first thing they did was establish a set of rules to govern the proceedings. And the big purpose of the secrecy was so that it would not be published in newspapers and articles around the colonies, because if for instance Randolph was for one side of an issue, and then he decided to switch his position, they might eat him up alive for doing so.
Yes.
So the whole argument was, in order to allow the ebb and flow of changing opinions, they needed to keep it secret so they can work on the document.
126 Days in Philada is the name of the book by Russell Rucker. His website is russelljrucker.com. Book available wherever books are sold. Of course, a link on our website, thisweekinamerica.us. A fascinating story of the Constitutional Convention. What was the overall makeup of the convention? Let's go back and go through some of the basics here to set the table for what actually happened.
Well, you had, I think it was 72 people that were actually nominated, but some of those, the likes of Patrick Henry, for instance, Richard Henry Lee, they decided not to attend. So in the end, so they were replaced. And in the end, we wound up with 55 delegates that went to the convention. There is a 56th person because they elected a secretary for the proceedings. But by the end of the convention, you had only 39 delegates signing. The 40th signature was the secretary of the convention. And you had a lot of different important people there, like Benjamin Franklin, the aging statesman at the time. And you had St. Thomas of Jevanneer was the other aging statesman. And of course, Washington had been elected president. Gorham would take over the committee of the whole and virtually run all the meetings just about every day. And so you had a lot of different people from 11 colonies for the most part. Rhode Island never sent delegates. I think it had to do with the expense of sending delegates.
Yes.
They sent a letter that was read on the opening day that they would not be sending delegates, but they would be approving whatever the group decided. And then I think it was New Jersey. They were quite late in getting there. They were over a month late. So a lot of the time, they only had 11 states. In the middle of it, you had Hamilton leaving because he was a second in a duel that involved one of the other delegates down in South Carolina, which is kind of a funny aspect. So you have people coming and going, and you had people that didn't like what was happening, so they left. So there was a time when even New York didn't have any representation there. There was a period of a few weeks in there because Hamilton was gone, and Yates and the other delegate had written home and left. So that's kind of the makeup. But you do have a couple of people here that became Supreme Court justices, different people that became governors, and a great majority of the people here were vastly important. You had 3 people that wrote constitutions up to present, and that would be Madison with the Virginia Plan, a Patterson from New Jersey wrote up a plan, and so did Pinckney of South Carolina. So it's kind of interesting that they would all come with the different plans, and then they're trying to hash through it.
It's a remarkable story. We hear so much about the Constitution, the Constitutional Convention. You take these people and make them come to life in the book 126 Days in Philada. The author, Russell J. Rucker, our guest on the program. Website, russelljrucker.com. A link on our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Why and how did we end up with the division of powers?
Well, the reason why is because these people were all elected officials. They were serving on the continent in various states, and they realized the problem of man itself. And that problem was, and I'm sure you'll understand this with today with politicians jogging for power. And that's what they were trying to stop. They were trying to stop any individual person from gaining too much power. So they split it up. They split it up all over the place. Even the legislature was divided in half with your House and your Senate, and and elected completely different ways. And then the president is elected separate, and something we don't think of today, but he's elected separately, unlike a parliamentary system in which you would elect a Congress per se, and that Congress would elect or appoint the president. So this is a completely different way of doing things. But the separation of powers is one of the really important things. Having an individual judiciary completely independent from the rest. And really, all the 3 branches are independent from each other. But that's really the primary reason. I think that's the real beauty of our Constitution itself. But it just didn't come naturally. They argued tooth and nail over every little thing, and they kept bringing things back, some of them, when they would lose their votes. So it's kind of an interesting thing, but that's really the reason for the division of power.
When you look at what's happening today, are we losing that division of power?
Yeah, we really are in some essence because of the party system.
Yes.
So you, instead of having an individual having power, you have parties having power working together. That really wasn't the intent of our way of government. In fact, if you look at Washington's farewell address, he warns us about political parties. But when you're working together, then it kind of erases those lines quite a bit. And that's kind of a problem, I guess, that we do have. And So they are erased somewhat. The other thing that's happened is the presidency was never meant to be as powerful as it is today. And with the acceptance of different departments, Department of Energy, education and the like, and different things that were brought in later, and the fact that the executive branch is in control of those once Congress creates them, it's made it more power and made Congress, which they thought was supposed to be the most important branch, a little bit weaker. And the Supreme Court, the judicial branch, has become more powerful. So there's been this kind of ebb and flow between the different branches of government there. And so, yes, it has changed some.
The book is 126 Days in Philada, a story of the Constitutional Convention by Russell J. Rucker, our guest on the program. Website, russelljrucker.com. Book available wherever books are sold. What was the purpose of the convention? Let's go back to why this all began. What was the purpose, the intent behind the forming of the convention, Constitutional Convention?
Well, back in when we had the Continental Congress, they established a constitution, which is the Articles of Confederation. And we lived under that for a while. And the problem was there was no way of forcing the states to go along. Now we had a war going on, a Revolutionary War, and they were trying to get the different colonies to pony up their share of the money to help pay for this. And it was a problem because some of the colonies were too poor to give. And so they were trying to correct the problems they were having in the weak Articles of Confederation, which is what it was. The Articles of Confederation even give absolute sovereignty to the states, which, if it was left to continue, it would wind up being like Europe is today, where, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Illinois would be like Portugal, Spain, and France.
Yes.
You'd have different countries. And one of the problems in the convention of not finishing the work, and there were problems and things just trying to get through it all, that they were concerned that if we didn't agree, that it would split into at least 3 different countries, and it might wind up with, as they talk about the sword settling the matter. In other words, we'd wind up having a war. And so that's really your answer there.
Why did you decide to write this book, historical fiction, on the convention, and then talk about the responsibilities you have in writing historical fiction?
Well, the reason I wrote this book, frankly, is I've been fascinated with the convention most of my life. And I wanted people to better understand the Constitution itself. And this meeting is where the Constitution was created. So I went through the records of the convention and I updated the language and turned it in from what they said to what they were saying. So I put it more in first person to make it more interesting. I tried to bring it to life to get more people interested in it.
Yes. And
the reason I went with historical fiction is because I wanted to create another character to kind of help tell the story. So I've created a delegate who you never know who it is or where he's from, but he's in the convention with them, discussing things with them. Nothing is altered. No argument is altered with this guy, but it kind of helps fill in what's missing and what's going on at night. And I thought it would make it more fun for people that weren't really interested in the dry history of it. But I did everything I could to keep it accurate, right down to the weather. I looked up the weather and even added weather in it. Got information from the 4th of July celebration they had that year. So I've added that in with this guy watching the parade and taking part in just being there. So I've tried real hard to bring it to life because I know a lot of people aren't particularly interested in the subject, but I wanted more people, regular citizens that might be more interested if they had a storyline through it. So that's really what I was trying to do, was get people more interested in it.
Well, mission accomplished. This is not a textbook. You have people and you have names, and we get to understand a little bit more about these people. It brings history alive. What would you say is the most important part of the book for somebody casually reading it? What do you hope the main takeaway is?
Well, I think the main takeaway probably is that, they were actually able to achieve this. Because there was this great distance between the different founders. Some wanted to stick with the Articles of Confederation. Once Madison brought a whole new document, because the idea was, with the Articles of Confederation, what they'd been given from Congress was to write amendments to fix the Articles of Confederation. And once Madison brought a whole new constitutional version, it created a real argument among the different people on whether we should stick with Congress's directive, or whether we should just go ahead and go along with Madison's idea of a whole new document. So you do have that going on in between too. But really, the most important thing is that we were to achieve a good constitution. And proof that it's a good constitution is that it's lasted this long. You cannot find another constitution anywhere on the planet that has lasted anywhere near as long as ours has. And the reason for that is what they did, and the allowing for amendments to be passed to help update as we went along, and that did a lot to correct the problem too. But I think that's the most important thing that was achieved. The big bypass they had was deciding how the different branches of the legislature would be voting.
Interesting. The book is 126 Days in Philada. You talk about the Great Compromise. Tell us a little bit about the Great Compromise, the role that played.
Well, there were two theories of thought. The one was like our House is today, House of Representatives is today, where you're voting by population. So you have so many House of Representative members, and they're based on population, as we all know, and
Yes.
they vote by population. But the other argument was that they should be going by state and wealth. See, a lot of the states didn't want to give up this idea of each one of them being equal, and that their state was sovereign, and so they were trying to protect the small states were trying to protect themselves from the large states. For the most part, some of the large states thought the small could actually overrun the large, but that's kind of the differences in the theories. But really, so they could not compromise on this. It was a big problem. The South wanted the slaves counted because they wanted more representation, and the North was arguing, well, then what about our cattle? And all that, if we're going to go by wealth and the importance of the state. So there was all that going on. So they agreed to form a committee of 11, which was the number of states. So they had one person from each state. And they came back with the compromise that you would have two branches, not the one. And that the one would represent the states, which is the Senate. Okay, so they would represent the states, where you would have two people from each state, and the other branch, the People's House, is as it's called, would represent the people. So you would have these two completely different branches, and that was kind of the compromise. But in that compromise, the House of Representatives got the right to begin money bills. And that was really the big compromise there, and that's why they started giving the Senate other things like treaty approval and your judges and executive branch people getting they had to be nominated and then approved by the Senate without the House. So they kind of split the duties up. But that's generally your great compromise, and there were a lot of people there that did not like that compromise, and it was a tight vote.
You know, it's so fascinating, all these moving parts that we have in our government and how they all came together, and that you bring it to life so well in the book 126 Days in Philada by Russell Rucker, our guest on the program. His website, his name, russelljrucker.com. Book available wherever books are sold, and links on our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Today, a movement for an Article 5 Convention of States. Why is it important to understand what happened in 1787? What role does that play today?
Well, you have two ways of amending our Constitution. You can, the House and Senate votes by 2/3, and they send amendments, specific amendments to the states, and 3/4 would have to approve. Now, the Article 5, the movement today, the Convention of States, has to do with the other way of amending it. Both are in our Constitution under Article 5, and that's why it's called the Article 5 movement. But basically, you would call for another convention. Okay?
Yes.
The Convention of States believe that they can just have specific things on the agenda to discuss. But this is my concern about the Convention of States has always been that once you're in a convention, you can do what Madison did. And then it's up to them how they would decide how to amend things, how to do things, and whether we even keep the same Constitution. So that's always been my fear with that. But I know there are a lot of people that disagree with me on that. But that's the importance of it. You get to the end of the convention and you have people talking about, well, people that had lost their argument, wanting to hold their convention, wanting it to go to the state ratifying conventions with the power to pass amendments and have that go to another general convention, which is what this was, and redo it. And Madison said that it was real dangerous to do many of these. It's hard enough getting the people that had there to agree with the various differences of opinions they had throughout the colonies. And there were lots of different opinions, because you had people that wanted an agrarian or agricultural economy. You had people that wanted a more mercantile economy. You get up to Boston and that area, and they're doing more trading than agriculture. And so all these different pieces had to come together.
Talk a little bit about, you mentioned before, Benjamin Franklin. He's in his 80s at that time. And was he active enough to truly make a difference? Or was he just another aging statesman there, no longer really contributing much? What did he have to offer to the convention?
Well, he had a tremendous amount. First of all, when you get to just before the Great Convention, Franklin gives a real important speech about asking for prayer. Okay, that we need our special friend to help build this, and really to kind of refocus us. And that's one of the big important speeches he gave, asking for a religious clergy to come in and pray each morning before the convention. And so he was trying to kind of refocus everybody and get people to agree a little more. And he pointed out in that speech that after 4 or 5 weeks of arguing over every little thing, they were really at a standstill. And that's why he made that motion. But the thing about the records that's really interesting is you have Yates, you have Madison, you have all kinds of different people, Hamilton, taking notes of the convention. So you have different viewpoints coming in when you look at the notes from the aspect of this founder or that founder. But with Franklin, you have the exact language. See, Franklin suffered badly from gout, and he had to be carried into the convention on a lot of days. He had invented this chair with 2 long rods on each side, and you had to have 4 people, 2 on each side, to carry him into the convention. And because of the gout, he was unable to stand most days. So he would write his speeches. So the speeches in the convention that Franklin wrote are his exact words the way he wrote it, which is different from the others because the others were kind of reporting on what was being said. So he had lots of different speeches that were lengthy, well thought out, well written. And then he would have, like Wilson, for instance, he would ask Wilson to read his speeches for him. So those would actually be read. But he was very influential, and a lot of people would listen to him because he was so well known. You know, he had been putting out his writings for so long by this time. And yes, he was an aging statesman. He had been, he was an inventor. He was a scientist. You know, he worked as a diplomat. I mean, he was the first postmaster general. So everybody pretty well knew him. And he was, a lot of people think, yeah, you know, look how old this guy was. What could he have contributed? But he contributed as much as just about anyone else there. So I guess that's the best way to answer that. I mean, he was an incredible, important founder during the convention.
A couple minutes left. I need to ask about George Washington. What was his role at the convention?
Well, that's really interesting. Okay. See, Washington comes to the convention and he is elected president, but there's an argument over who to elect. And it's between him and Robert Morris. See, Robert Morris had financed, for the most part, the revolution. He is known as the financier of the revolution. He spent most of his wealth and was constantly trying to recoup money to help pay for it. And so there was a lot of people that wanted him as well. And what Robert Morris did, and he would do this routinely, is he would turn down the appointment and he would offer up someone else. In fact, that's how Hamilton became our first Secretary of the Treasury. So Robert Morris got up and he made a speech and he moved that Washington be given the job as president of the convention. So Washington was elected, you know, because he no longer had opposition. He was unopposed. And he would open up each day the beginning of the convention. And then he would step away from his role as the head of the convention, and he would let Gorham, Delegate Gorham, take over running the meeting. So he didn't say a lot. There are a couple of times on the beginning and the end where he makes a statement, and towards the end of the convention, there was a movement to burn or otherwise destroy all the records of the convention. And he made a statement, well, what do you want, you know, and they decided to give it to him. And he said, well, what do you want me to do with this stuff? You know, what do you want me to do with all these papers and records? Because he didn't wanted some kind of acknowledgement from the group of what they intended him to do. So he was there. And as commander-in-chief of the armed forces, he was well loved. And, you know, he tried, I think, to step away. He was given the role and he tried to step away and let others speak and debate. But every once in a great while, he would have something to say. That's really his primary role.
This is such a fascinating conversation, and you will, it comes to life as you read 126 Days in Philada. Talk briefly, got a couple minutes here at the end. When you look at how this was formed and today, the discussion over how do we interpret it today, is it a living constitution? Did they write this meaning this is here, this is the way it should be? How do you feel about this? Is this a living document that should change and be interpreted according to the times that we're living in?
Well, my problem with a living, breathing document is who's interpreting it and what does
Yes.
it mean.
Yes.
If you read the document, and if the First Amendment means you have a right to free speech, it means you have a right to free speech. It's not for speech that you would automatically agree with. Sometimes it's for speech that would repulse you, so that each group has a chance to speak. And I really believe in looking through it from a textualist lens. In other words, you're looking at what the text actually says. You can read it. It's in Old English, but it's not that hard to decipher and read. And so I think you need to look at exactly what it says. And when there's a discrepancy in meaning, I believe that we look through the historical aspect of it. What were they thinking when they wrote it? What was their intention? If we want to update the Constitution, there's always the amendment process. There's always the convention of state possibility. There are ways to amend it. The problem some have is that it takes such an overwhelming majority to amend it. But that's what they wanted.
Yes.
They wanted a constitution that could be amended, but in order to amend anything, the greater majority of the people, an overall large majority, would have to agree to that. And, that's really where I come up. I don't like the living, breathing, because it could mean anything depending on who the person is. And I don't want a group of judges just deciding what it is. I want them to have to do the work and look at what it says.
When I look at this, I see the Constitution and I see what went into it, have more of an understanding, again, a refreshed understanding by talking with you and understanding what's in the book, 126 Days in Philada. This was, to me, an act of genius. These people could get together and come up with this document that has lasted so long and stood the test of time. Am I over-exaggerating? What's your feeling on the Constitution? What went into it and what came out with the Constitution?
Well, actually, I agree with you a lot. You had you had the best minds that we had at the time in the convention. In fact, several of our founders even mentioned that this was such an astounding group of men. But they were so different, and they were from such different places.
Yes.
You have those that were engaged in trade. You had those down south that were involved in crops like tobacco and cotton. And then you get to the center states, they were more into wheat and that kind of thing. And so you had complete different ways of life that they had to adjust. I mean, it was a miracle that they were able to accomplish what they did. But the other thing these people were, for the most part, is they were people who had already been elected. So they were serving in government. So they could look at what this colony was, well, it's a state by this time, which state, was doing this, which state was doing that, and the differences they were having in their own governance. And I think that helped a tremendous amount, too, to get to the document we have today. And I really am happy for this document and for the separation of powers. Most people, when you're talking about the Constitution, they get to the amendments. But I really think your separation of powers is far more important.
where that's that balance that we all sort of strive for, and you wonder whether that's under threat with everything that we're seeing. And I'm going to add the word miracle to genius when I'm thinking about this, when they put this together. I like that perspective. This book, 126 Days in Philada, Story of the Constitutional Convention by Russell J. Rucker, available wherever books are sold. You'll find information on his website, russelljrucker.com, information on 2 other books that he's written there, Textualism and Originalism in Our Constitutional Republic, and our founders in their words and why they matter. Hopefully we can talk about those books at some time as well. It's been a fascinating conversation. Russell, thank you so much for being with us on the program. It could use hours to talk about this. Did an excellent job of focusing in and bringing the Constitution to life in the wonderful book that you've written, 126 Days in Philada. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
It has been our pleasure, and information at Russell's website, russelljrucker.com. My thanks to Reader's Magnet, self-publishing and marketing company, for arranging our conversation with Russell today. And again, all of this information on our website, thisweekinamerica.us. And we're back on today's program right after these messages.
This Week in America is online. You can visit our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Scott Pinkerton, associate producer of This Week in America. Jay Anderson, segment producer. Ben Watson, webmaster. Otto Bechet, director of engineering and TV production. This Week in America produced and is a trademark of Blue Funk Broadcasting, LLC. For information on all of our guests and to listen to this week's show, our website again at thisweekinamerica.us. And I'm Sean Bratton, executive producer of This Week in America.